Tom Hartman. We were the God Squad, and we had our own TV show. We had an HBO special with, which won the I guess the highest award in television, called the Peabody Award, and we wrote a TV special for HBO called How Do You Spell God, which was from our book, How Do You Spell God, which was an introduction to the world's religions for children. And it was all about kids. And they animated me, they animated Tommy, they animated our friend the Dalai Lama. And I was really pissed off. It was my first revelation about how the media distorts things. They animated Tommy, and he looked like Robert Redford. And so when they animated him, he looked like a really young Robert Redford. The Dalai Lama is very holy and cute. And when they animated him, he was especially holy and especially cute. They animated me, and I looked like I slept in a refrigerator box under the 59th Street Bridge. And I said, look, not for nothing, but it's crayons. Can't you just get rid of my bags and, spruce me up a little bit? And they said, no, Rabbi, that's how you look. So that's how Sheila Nevins at HBO taught me that you are what you are. And Tommy and I were regulars on Good Morning America, and we had a show, and we did some books. But mainly, we went around and we talked at places, and we had a simple message. We know enough about how we're different, and we don't know enough about how we're all the same. I thought that message was so simple and stupid that it was silly for us to have to say such a thing. But he said, no, it'll be important. And for 25 years, we did our work together. They made a movie out of our friendship, and Ben Stiller played me. And Edward Norton played Tommy. And Jenna Elfman played my wife Betty, who we were both in love with. Not exactly as the movie shows it, but we both loved Betty. And the name of the movie is Keeping the Faith. And so they replay it periodically on TV. And they what?
Just to keep the faith.
Yeah, just to keep the faith. And our friendship was a thing, and it's part of what I want to teach you this morning, which comes up in this week's Torah portion, which is Noach, which is the second Torah portion. Noach begins on page 41 of the Torah. Welcome, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos. I killed Rabbi Feinstein, so that's why I'm here. Make sure you get a Torah. I don't like to reveal secret rabbi stuff, but there's things that Rabbi Feinstein does that are secret rabbi things. That, what the hell? I'll just reveal them to you, so that you'll know when he pulls them on you again. One secret rabbi thing is to always check the thermostat. They teach you. They said it puts the congregation at ease. They relax. Check the thermostat. So that's not him. They taught him that in rabbinical. Welcome, Solar. It is cold. I could care less. So freeze. I care about the truth. Eddie cares about you. That's a big difference. Actually, over the 5 years I've been interrupting him in this class, I actually have grown to really care about you. and you have been very, very gracious to me and to my family. My son-in-law, Cy Sussman, is here. I want to thank him for coming. And for those of you who said, look, Gellman is filling in for Feinstein. It's a good week to stay home and sleep. But you said, oh, what the hell? If no one shows up, he's going to be crushed emotionally, which is true. I'm a deeply, deeply sensitive man. So you showed up anyway, and I'm very grateful. I was the president of the New York Board of Rabbis, which is the largest rabbinic organization in the world. And I was the president of the board during the attacks on 9/11. So the service at Yankee Stadium on the 24th that Oprah organized had 3 speeches, a Protestant, a Catholic, and a Jew. I was supposed to be there as the Catholic, but they had another bishop, I think, who showed up, a cardinal. So I went over and I did the Jewish speech. It was the hardest time of my life. Tommy and I did 50 funerals in that month, and not one of the funerals of the 50 had a body. There's a thing about grief. My first line of my speech was, 6,000 people didn't die last week, because at that time we thought it was 6,000, and later it was revised to 3,000. I said, 6,000 people didn't die last week. One person died last week 6,000 times. And that's the thing about grief. Hi, welcome, good job. There's plenty of room here. That's what Eddie says. It's never true, because there's never any room. Because frankly, some of you have wide tushies. I'm just saying. I'm not insulting and I'm not judging you. I'm not judging you. There's good food around here. But some of you you're taken up it's 2 cheeks and a half a cheek. Just what I'm saying. So anyway, grief is a palpable thing when it's just one person. But when it's 50,000 people, all of whom lost someone in the attack, because that's what they did for the group that went to Yankee Stadium on the 24th. You had to have lost someone. 50,000 people showed up. Grief on that level is like a fog. It's like an actual thing. It has substance to it, and it's crushing. So we did after the 50 funerals we did, I was really just crushed. And I'll just say one word about Eddie. I say in the presence of his father, who taught him everything he knows. Eddie is the best rabbi in America who is not retired. And what? I'm just saying. What? Come on. Give me a break here. I'm trying to do a nicey nice thing, because it's true. You have no idea how big this class is. Rabbis have Torah classes all over America. A lot of synagogues, sadly, have no adult education. I was telling Cy on the way over, I have 2 little techniques to judge people. I'm very judgmental. When I go into their house, I'm looking for pictures of the family and books. If people don't have books on shelves and they don't have pictures of the family, something is wrong in the house. especially if all the colors coordinate. That's just stupid. But one thing that I look at in synagogues is, do they have adult education? And one of the great things about Valley Beth Shalom is the number of adult education courses and opportunities that have been created here and have been sustained here, and that is a tribute to Rabbi Feinstein. And the other is, most rabbis, if a rabbi came into their class and started to interrupt them, the standard operating procedure is call the police. Because that rabbi needs to be removed from your class. He's going to wreck your class, and he needs help. But Eddie is a different kind of guy. He's just gracious and kind, and you're just damn lucky to have him. You're lucky to have me too, but still, you're really lucky to have him. And this is, as far as I know, which means I always, whenever it's as far as I know, that means to me it's the truth. This is the largest Torah class in America right now. And you have created that. And you should be very proud.
We have a chavruta here. You and Eddie are a chavruta.
We are.
And that makes a big difference in the education.
It does. It's a good thing, but it's a rare thing.
But it's good. That's what gives the class the quality.
Yeah, I know that. But I just wanted to say how lucky you are to have him as a son.
And you too, sir.
And for those who don't have him as a son, and me too. That was, and me too, he said, for those watching on the streaming. All right, let's study Noah. So it begins, the first thing about Noah, I'm mainly going to talk to you today about something that's going to make you uncomfortable, because I could really make you happy, but that's not my nature. I want to challenge you. And today I'm going to teach you about the Jewish attitude toward Christians, and how that attitude toward non-Jews evolved. And it's actually from the Torah portion. That's the trick, the rabbi trick of Eddie's that I'm revealing to you. When Eddie comes to a portion where there's nothing in it, like leprosy, the Tazria Metzora, when he comes to a portion like that, the chance of him actually studying that portion with you is 0. He'll come in and he'll say, well, today we're going to do Isaiah or Jeremiah, or today we're going to do the prayer book. Why does he do that? Because it's leprosy and there's nothing in it. And that's a fact about the Torah. There's a lot of the Torah portions where there's really nothing in them that's that interesting. It's lists of things that the priests wore. Like, who cares what they wore? And things that they sacrificed. And like, we sacrifice animals? Why do we care about that? We don't. It's completely irrelevant to our lives. And since Eddie is so kind, he's always trying to find the parts of the Torah that fit into your life. And my job in this class, so far as I see it, is to tell you the things that don't fit into your life. Because there's 2 ways that you show your love for Torah. One is to find out what you love in this book. And the second is to find out what you hate in this book. If you can't read the Torah and find parts that are completely irritating, that have no connection to your values and your life, if you can't find them in here, you're not reading the Torah. You're reading it with what the German Bible scholar Hermann Gunkel once called sacred inattention. Sacred inattention. It means if you read a novel or go see a movie or a play, you're using all your mental faculties to understand it and evaluate it. If you read the Torah, a lot of people switch off their brain. They switch it off. They say, oh, it's from God, it's holy. Well, who am I to say I don't like this part or this is to do? But what if it was God's intention to give us a work that was heteronomous, that wasn't homogeneous, that had parts that were written by old, misogynist, prejudiced, bigoted people, so that we could say, that's not the Torah. That's not the Torah I hear and I love. And that in addition to those parts, written by people 4,000 years ago, that had all of their errors, including the fact that they thought the earth was the center of the solar system, which they didn't even know about, and their notions about the relations between men and women, and homosexuality and other things that were just bound by their time. They weren't bad people, they were just bound by their time. And they wrote from their time. What is wrong with saying that God gave us a Torah that has old parts that are not true and were never intended to be true, and parts like don't steal and love your neighbor as yourself, and you should tell your child in that day it is because of what God did for me when I left Egypt. It has those parts too, where you say, that came from somewhere that wasn't human. That is true not just 4,000 years ago. That's true forever. My life with the Torah has been a life of sifting and winnowing and figuring out the parts that were given by people that God intended us to find and God intended us to reject, and the parts that were given by God that God intended us to find and God intended us to love and teach to the world forever. Thank you, you're dismissed. So, we begin the study of the Parsha Noach with the proof that the Torah was written by more than God, or not more than God, but by a bunch of people, several people, and that the Torah is a work that combines several authors' work. Now, these authors were in some cases, very few cases, the authors of the text. In most cases, these four people, J, E, P, and D, were people who codified oral traditions. Eventually, the Torah had to be written down. The oldest text we have is from the year 1000. So before that, aside from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the oldest, but they aren't complete, but the Masoretic text is from the year 1000. I mean, Abraham is from almost the year 2000 before the Common Era. Abraham is 3,000 years before the first text that we have. So you say, well, how could this oral tradition endure for 3,000 years without it being distorted like that game of telephone when you whisper around a room and eventually it gets all screwed up? Well, I have a PhD in philosophy, and I have a second doctoral work. I never wrote my dissertation, but I did the work in Buddhism. And I studied Buddhism, and the Jataka legends of the Buddha are a good example. All of the legends that the Buddha taught, he never wrote anything. Just like Jesus never wrote anything, and Moses never wrote it. Well, Moses transcribed a few things. These were all oral traditions, passed on by generations and generations of Buddhists who had people, we eventually called them Tanas, who would memorize different parts of the text. So if it was Noah, they'd call on Moshe and say, okay, Moshe, recite the Noah stories. And he would tell the Noah stories. Eventually, they codified them, but they had a problem by the time they codified them. There were strong traditions about these stories that conflicted. And I'll give you some examples. Open up with me. There's difficulties in the story of Noah that prove that the story of Noah is two stories glued together. And that this text is used in colleges, the Noah text, when you take the Bible as literature. This text is used to show and to prove, and you can read it in Richard Elliott Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible, the JEPD, it's called the documentary hypothesis. It was developed in the 19th century by two German Protestant scholars. The Protestants loved the Bible. In fact, Protestant Americans brought that love here. Harvard was established to teach clergy and to teach them the Bible and to get them into Goldman Sachs. Those were the two reasons they established. It says in the founding document of Harvard to teach young clergy the sacred writ and get people into Goldman Sachs. So in Trinity Church, which I went to several times after the towers were hit, because it was the closest church to where the planes came in. They have over their ark the Hebrew word Yud He Vav He, our name for God, which when we encounter it in the Torah, we say Adonai. But of course, Yud He Vav He doesn't pronounce as Adonai. Yud is Y, He is H, Vav, V, and He. So if you transliterate it, it would be YHVH. So Bible scholars who have no religious compunctions about pronouncing the name of God pronounce that name Yahweh. And if you study the Bible in college, that's the way you'll pronounce the name of God. And the first story of Noah is by an author. Harold Bloom wrote a wonderful book called J, the Book of J, where he tries to unpack this scholar he thinks was a woman, who was actually J, who writes the stories of the Torah of God's inner life, God's thoughts, God's feelings of regret. And that's the J source. And the other that's combined in the Noah story, is the P source. The P is the final redactor, the final guy who put it all together. And that was clearly a priest in the Temple of David. May have been David. It wasn't a priest, but it was a priest. And the P source is very straight and stolz, let's say in German, very rigorous and very unfeeling, no emotions. Like the story of the creation, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, that's P. That's absolutely P. The second, when there was a garden and it was watered and God said, let me make man, and he put him there, but he was lonely and he made a woman out of his rib, that's J. And those are the two creation stories. when P came along to codify the Torah, he just put them together. You say, well, wait a minute, how could he put them together? That's a contradiction. Well, yes, it is. But on the other hand, if you think that both J and P were receiving the Word of God in different ways, then putting them together made sense. The more likely reason, my theory, is that the two stories had already gotten rooted in the people's memories so deeply, he couldn't eliminate them. If he did the Torah without, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, people say, well, wait a minute, why didn't you put the creation story in there? And he would have been killed. He had to put it in. And the second one, with the creation of Eve, he had to put in because everyone knew about a rib in the woman. He had no choice. Now, one of the differences between ancient works and modern works is that the law of contradiction doesn't apply in the older works. If it was all God's word, so then these were just a bunch of stories that got put in, but they weren't just stories. They were gifts from God. I can't explain it really adequately for you. It's a totally different mindset. Contradiction wasn't a defect. It just didn't matter. The other thing that was different about ancient works is that old is good, new is bad. New and improved would be a reason not to buy the cereal. It still is a good reason not to buy the cereal. What was wrong with the old Cheerios, for heaven's sakes? Old was good because it was closer to the creation. And old people were wise back in the day when people cared about us. Not in the day when old and ageism is rampant and everyone wants to look young and everyone wants to be young. This is a totally different, it's an inversion of our values about age and youth. And it applies to the literary works as well. So anyway, let's look at the reasons that we know by just reading the text of Noah that there were two stories here. First of all, there's doublets, which means the same thing is said twice. There's no reason to say it twice, but it's said twice. Look at chapter 6, verse 5. Page what? I don't do pages. I do chapters and verses. That's a thing I disagree with Eddie about. I said, look, if you can't get to the chapter and verse, you're a complete moron. And I don't believe that you're morons. So, and it wasn't God revealed on page 33 of the Torah. 34. No, it's chapter 6, verse 2. 33, like I said. So he said, the divine being saw, 6:5, sorry, verse 5, 6:5. No, you were right. So the Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. I want you to remember that verse later, because when we talk about Christians and the myth that Christians believe in original sin and we don't, I'm going to remind you about this text, which says, the inclination of man's heart, Yetzer lev ha'adam ra minu rav. The inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Tell me how that isn't original sin. Wait, what did you ask?
What is original sin?
Original. Well, that's, you haven't gone to catechism class like I have. I'll explain that later. But anyway, the point here is that we saw that man's heart is evil from his youth. man has a bad streak in him. We have a bad streak, and it starts when we're young. Okay?
Well, defines when he says Ra. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't know if you saw my hand.
No, that's all right. I didn't, and I wasn't looking. Eddie looks. I could care less. Go ahead. No, please.
So he defines Ra not as bad or evil. He defines it as visceral or just focused on oneself. So kind of like how animals or insects or whatever animal is not. That's Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Tov is.
Yeah. Well, Eddie's deeply wrong on that point. And the proof that he's deeply wrong is this is the reason God is destroying the world. So to assume that it isn't bad flies in the face of God's decision to destroy all life because the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth. So the simple pshat, simple meaning of the text is man is an SOB. He has a bad inclination. And the Eddie's interpretation is a riff on Rabbi Meir's interpretation of the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. Rabbi Meir, who studied with the great epicurus Elisha ben Abuya, I'll teach you about that next time Eddie has a gig out of town. But Rabbi Meir says, and God said everything was tov ma'od, very good in the creation. How could the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, be very good? And Meir says, well, without the Yetzer Hara, you would never have a family, you'd never build a city, and you'd never write a book. So he's talking about ambition and ego, right. Id really also, but this idea of Rabbi Meir fits in with the happy, clappy interpretation of Judaism, which Eddie is sometimes guilty of, because he's happy and clappy. The Torah is about the real world we live in. It's about men ruling over women. And that isn't right, for men to rule over women. It's about genocide, and that isn't right. It's about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's about the elimination of the Amalekites. It's about a flat world, a flat earth. There's things in here that just aren't right. But there's also things that are luminous. So what do you want to do? You want to just ignore the parts that aren't good? Why do you think most people don't read this every week? Why do you think people who do read it every week, fundamentalists in Mississippi, why do you think they don't read it with their full brain? Well, maybe they are reading it with their full brain. But I don't know. But the point is, the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth, 6:5. And then 6:12. The earth was filled with lawlessness. Yes.
In verse 5, the word is translated as man. Is that
Right.
singular or is that a plural?
Yetzer lev ha'adam, singular. But it means collective.
Are they describing each individual human being or
Yes.
a model?
The whole, all of humanity. People. Humankind is evil from its youth. Yes.
Here in the Torah, thank you, God is blaming men for all the evil. I think God should blame himself for making men with that DNA.
Right. So that's an interesting question. Is this destruction of the world, is it really God's fault because God made us this way? And that's the defense for, hey, I was made this way. And the answer is no, it's not God's fault, because the reason there is evil in the world is because God made us with free will. Now, we chose the free will. We could have had a different life. We could have had a life like a baby in the womb, where you're not choosing anything. Everything is given to you and you are fed. But when Adam and Eve ate of the knowledge, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they said, no, life in the garden is perfect, but it isn't perfect because we aren't human. And we aren't human because we're not choosing anything. Our free will is what gives us our humanity. And the proof of that, I have a favorite proof for free will. And that is love. I ask people if they've ever loved someone. And it's surprising to me how many people don't raise their hand. But if you've loved someone, particularly if you love them and married them, and you're asked, is this person you love the smartest person in the world? Unless you're stupid, you say, no, of course not. They're not the smartest person. Say, is this person you love the kindest person in the world? No. Are they the most beautiful person in the world? No. And you're going through a list of reasons you might love someone. Are they the most well-read? No. So why do you love them? And for Aristotle, the answer to that in his Nicomachean Ethics is love is a terminal value. It's where why this, why that stops. The kid says, Mommy, why did you slap my hand? Honey, I slapped your hand because you were about to touch the stove. Why couldn't I touch the stove? Because the stove is hot and it would burn you. Why did you care if it would burn me? I cared it would burn you because I love you. Why do you love me? Stop. You could say, because you're my kid, but a lot of parents don't love their kids. Love, no, it's true. But love is a terminal value. That is, we choose to love that person. That's it. Are there reasons? You could say reasons, but they aren't really the reasons, because when you add them all up, they aren't the reason you love that person. They are, you chose it. And in choosing love, you affirmed your humanity. That's exactly what the chosen people means. It means God is saying, look, you're Jews. You are incredibly difficult to live with. You are constantly yelling and griping and fetching. And it is very difficult. Ask any rabbi. That's the smile of a knowing rabbi. And yet I chose you. Why? Terminal value. And it says in the Torah, I didn't pick you because you were the most numerous of the nations of the world. I picked you so you could take my Torah into the world. So God has free will, and we have free will. And that is the meaning of what it is to be made in the image of God. It doesn't mean like my book that Isa Aaron at Hebrew Union College, a professor of education, says in her first class to the students there, I want you to know about the greatest Jewish children's book that was ever written. And this was picked by the New York Times and so forth as one of the 10 best books of the year. And it's a book about of modern midrashim. And it's called Does God Have a Big Toe? And one of the stories is about that. And it's about the image of God. So we aren't in the image of God that we have a big toe and God has a big toe. We're in the image of God because God has freedom of the will and we have freedom of the will. Why aren't we animals? We are animals. But why aren't we just like the animals? Because the one thing animals lack is freedom of the will. The swallows don't return to Capistrano because they decide to do it. They're driven to do it by their instinct to migrate. There's no free will there. There's no free will in a lion deciding to eat an antelope. They eat the antelope because they're hungry. And it is one of their, their instincts. So we see 2 times where humans are wicked. The decision to wipe out all life from earth is said twice. God tells Noah to get animals to put in the ark twice. The story records that Noah fulfills God's command twice. Noah and his family get on the ark twice, in 7:7 and 7:13. The flood starts twice. Animals get on the ark twice. The flood waters lift the ark above the ground twice. All humans and animals on earth die and are wiped out twice. Noah sends out a raven to look for dry land, and then he sends out a dove to do the same, looking for the same thing. Noah's 3 sons are introduced twice. God is sometimes, and so those are the doublets. And sometimes God is called Yud-He Vav-He, and sometimes God is called Elohim. And those are the marking points that show us the 2 authors. They had a favorite word for God. J was Yud-He Vav-He, E was Elohim. P used both. The contradictions of the 2 stories. Is Noah supposed to bring 1 pair of each kind of animal? Verse 6:20. From birds of every kind of cattle, creeping things, 2 of each kind you shall stay alive. 2. 2. 2. 7:2. Of every pure animal you shall take 7 pairs. What's the 7 pairs? What about the 2? And of every animal that's not pure, 2. A male and its mate. So there we have a different story. There it's 7, unclean, clean and unclean, 7 and 2. And then the other one, it's just 2. Do the flood waters come from God allowing the waters of the depths and the heavens to overflow the earth? So it's the waters overflowed the earth? Or does it come from excessive rain? There's 2 different versions in the 2 different flood stories. Does the flood last for 40 days? This is a big one. 7:4, 12, and 17, 40 days. Or does it last for 150 days? Chapter 7, verse 24. 2 different lengths of time of the flood. So these are just some of the differences in the stories that prove it was 2 different authors. There is some overlap and some key overall differences. The P text is longer, filled with technical details, such as how to build the ark, the age of Noah, dates when things occur. Furthermore, God plans the covenant in advance and no sacrifice is mentioned. P's description of the flood is also closely connected with part of P's creation story concerning the creation as the separation of the waters from the earth. And so that this story reflects an undoing of creation. So for P, very symmetrical writer, not very imaginative, but a brilliant writer. The creation story, I taught creative writing at Northwestern, where in the English department, where I did my doctorate in philosophy, and I would teach them how to write midrashim, interpretations of the Torah. And there were non-Jews in the class, of course, and Jews. And they all had their gripes about the creation story. And I said, okay. you write a creation story that in one page goes from nothing to everything that exists. And also, by the way, make it memorable so that people will recite it by memory for 2,000 years. Okay? And then they realized chapter 1 of Genesis is brilliant. Brilliant. And, Cy and I were talking, if you actually look at how things evolved, it's pretty spot on about how things really evolved. You know, first there's light in the universe that isn't planets and isn't stars, and then the stars coalesce, and then there's water everywhere, and it yields to a firmament, and that the living things creep up from the water and evolve into swarming things and slithering things, and at the end of that creation is man. So it's not all that ridiculous. And it's very beautiful. And there's just two different, so P starts out with creation is a separation of the chaotic waters, right? He's divided the waters from the waters. And then what's the flood? The chaotic waters come back together. So the story of Noah is the story of the erasing of creation and the recreation of a new world. And because God has freedom of the will, which is how we learn things, the greatest teaching I can give you, which is that the Torah is the record of God learning how to live with us. It's not the record of anything else. It's the record of God learning how to live with flawed human beings who are trying to reach to God, but failing and succeeding and failing. In my case, succeeding more than you, but who cares? Who cares? The point is that God is learning. And after the flood, God learned. You know, I can't just keep wiping these people out and wiping this creation out because they don't come up to my standards. And that's what the covenant with Noah is about. The seed time and harvest, summer and winter, day and night shall no longer cease. I will never destroy the earth with a flood. Doesn't say you won't decide to pollute the world to death, but it does say I won't destroy. So that's God learning. That's God learning in a new creation. Now, I want to switch to a part of this portion that isn't in the portion, but is implied by it according to the rabbis. The question that I've wanted to ask you today, but in my typical way, I wandered off and used too much time. What I want to talk to you about today is our attitude toward Christians. What is one of the things when you study a religion, you want to know what the religion believes in itself. What do we believe? What do Jews believe? But one of the things you'd want to know, I wanted to know, I would always want to know, what is the attitude of that religion toward other religions? You know, if their attitude is, they're very good and we like to eat them for lunch, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to study another religion somewhere else where it's a little safer than it is here. So the question that I ask you that most of you really don't have an answer for, and you should, is what is our attitude toward non-Jews? Okay? It's funny that you study Torah with Eddie and he does everything. His scope is so enormous. But in this one area, he needed someone to come into the class whose best friend was a priest and who taught him about Christianity. Not as the way Christians like to teach non-Christians. I'd like you to convert to be a Christian. But as we're both climbing the same mountain to God, Marc. We're both climbing the same mountain. and I want to know your songs, your climbing songs. And I said, well, we got Dreidel Dreidel, and you have the Handel's Messiah. I'm saying you're going to have to cut us some slack here. On the other hand, we go to the Carnegie Deli to film a beginning to our show, and of course I order the pastrami on rye, and Tommy, I swear to you, he's dead now. I pray for his soul. I'm still not over his death. One of the most moving moments of my life was when I came back to class here after Tommy's funeral, and Eddie had everyone stand, and we said Kaddish for my friend. You said Kaddish for a priest. There isn't a single Jewish law that supports doing that. But he did it because his friend was hurting. And I love him, but in the Carnegie Deli, my friend ordered corned beef on white bread with cheese. And I didn't know what to do. Of course, the deli guy calls the cops. And they come in and they say, we had a 904 corned beef on white bread with cheese. Father, is that you? Did you do that, Father? Said McCahey, the cop who came in. Tommy said, I did it. And they said, don't do it again, Father. You're in the Carnegie Deli. It's pastrami on rye with a smear of deli mustard. That's it. Anything else and you're out of here. So the question is, what is our idea about? So he said we're climbing the same mountain to God. And that's how I view other religions. We're all climbing the same mountain to God. And I want to know, and now here, ask yourself this question. Because if you have ever entertained the idea that Christians have nothing to teach us, that Dreidel Dreidel is in fact musically superior to the Hallelujah chorus, okay? If you believe that, and your therapist can help you, if you are such a Jewish chauvinist that you don't believe Christians can teach us anything, I have something to tell you. You have to ask yourself this question. You have to ask yourself this question. What is the likelihood that God gave all the truth about the world and faith and religion and everything, that God gave all the truth to us and none of the truth to any other faith? What are the odds of that? And if you say 100%, you are a bigot. You are a chauvinist. And you need to open your mind, not to becoming a Christian, God forbid, but you need to open your mind to what is it in these other faiths that they might have gotten right that we got wrong. My daughter and my wife and others, they go to do yoga. Did we invent that? No. Hinduism invented that. 5,000 years before zero, they were doing yoga. I've had the interchange with Eddie and with Borovitz, with Marc about unconditional forgiveness. We had that big contretemps. And I'm saying, I don't know if unconditional forgiveness is right, but I do know that's what Christianity teaches. And we don't. And they may have gotten it right. Maybe not forgiving people gidges you and kills you inside and makes you like a person who swallows poison and expects someone else to die. Maybe that's true. There are problems in our relationship with Christians, and I want to start with the problems. First is John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the Gospels. And John is the worst of the four because he's the only one who spoke Greek. Others spoke Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And the Kaddish is in Aramaic. And Halach Ma'anya is in Aramaic. John 14:6 is the big problem. I quote to you from the New Testament, which contrasts not to the Old Testament. I never call the Tanakh the Old Testament, because the old implies there must be a new one. I'm not PC, but it does grate me the wrong way. So I will refer to this as the Hebrew Bible in English. The Hebrew Bible in English, yeah, you understand. And I refer to the other one as the Christian Testament. That way it isn't old and new. So in the Christian Testament, in John 14:6, which was at a time in Christianity when Jews were blamed for the death of Jesus, and anti-Semitism, because of eventually the Edict of Constantine and the fact that Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman, the blame, which was initially on the Romans, who killed Jesus because crucifixion was against Jewish law, and even though there were a lot of Jews who were happy that he was gone, members of the Sanhedrin, it was the Romans who killed him. But the Christian story changed with John, so it was the Jews who wanted him dead. They couldn't change that it was the Romans who killed him. John says it was the Romans who killed him, but you have the thing with Pilate where they say, his blood be on us and on our children, the Jews say that. And Pilate said, I wash my hands of this. So there's a new story, an anti-Jewish story. And it begins in John 14:6. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. That's the obstacle. It's called, in fancy academic language, by people who wear tweed jackets and have patches on their elbow, supersessionism. Supersessionism. It means, Jews, you once had a covenant with God. Congratulations. That covenant is over. And there's a new covenant now. And that new covenant is the Christian covenant. And the only way to be saved in your covenant is by doing the halacha, the Taryag mitzvot, the commandments. The only way to be saved in our story is to believe that in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the light, and no one comes to the Father but through me. Meaning, unless you believe in Jesus, you can't be saved. Which made Christianity a religion of belief. Judaism is a religion of blood plus belief. We are unique in the world in that we are the only religion in the world. There's a book, Religion for Dummies, and I wrote that book with Tommy. And we discovered that all the religions in the world are blood religions or belief religions. You belong to the religion either because of blood, meaning you're born into it, and if you aren't born into it, you can't join it. You can't become a Sioux Indian. I knew a Sioux Indian once, and I said, look, I want to join, just, because I have the name all picked out. I have my name, my Indian name. Prince Whitefish. And I don't know, we kind of drifted apart after that. Not exactly sure why that happened. But anyway, you can't become a Sioux Indian. Do you know that the largest blood religion in the world isn't us, where you have to be born of a Jewish mother, or the Reform movement that I'm a part of, sadly, the Reform movement, which says you're Jewish if your mother's Jewish, or if just your father's Jewish, but you pay your building fund. Welcome to the tribe, which was the worst thing we ever did. But anyway, aside from the worst thing we ever did, which was the graduation of the first class of Hebrew Union College at my seminary in 1898, where Isaac Mayer Wise had a banquet for the graduates that began with clams on the half shell. No, and it got beyond that. Then there was shrimp, and then there was other treif, and it's called the Treifer Banquet. And I saw the menu. It was unbelievable. And they even paired the right wine. And if you write into Wine Aficionado, what's the best wine to drink with treif? They still have the record from... And it ended with, as Hannibal Lecter said, a nice Chianti. So that's the worst thing we have. And then the conservative rabbis on the faculty got up, walked out, and then HUC created Jewish Theological Seminary where Eddie was ordained. And, it was, it's one of the worst things we ever did. Anyway, we are a religion of blood, but we allow converts. How? No one knows. When you convert someone, we say, do you believe in blah, blah, blah? But the blah, blah, blah is just what we create. There's a little thing in the rabbi's book. Ask them if they believe in this and this and this. There's no halacha to it. There's nothing, because we have no creed. We have nothing. We have nothing that you have to believe to be Jewish. If your mother's Jewish, you can be eating pork on Yom Kippur with cheese on it. You could order a pastrami sandwich on white bread with cheese and still be a Jew. And if you decide, and you can say Jesus is my Lord. And if you decide, what was I thinking? Jesus is not my Lord. He's a good carpenter, but he isn't a God, and that's it. And I'm not with that anymore. I'm Jewish again. You don't have to convert back. You can't convert back because you never were gone. That's what blood means. And the biggest blood religion in the world today, 800 million people, is Hinduism. And if you could argue that two of the greatest religious leaders of all time were Gandhi and the Buddha, or the Buddha and Gandhi. And both the Buddha and Gandhi tried to change this in Hinduism, and both of them failed. Because part of blood is what they call in Hinduism the Varnas, which means the caste system. The Sudras, the untouchables, the Brahmins are on the top. So obviously you can't convert to be a Hindu, because if you could convert, you'd choose to be a Brahmin. But you can't choose to be a Brahmin. You're a Brahmin if your father's a Brahmin. Just like in Judaism, you're a Kohen if your father's a Kohen. We would have been completely blood. We have Varnas. The Kohen, Levi, Israel is our Varnas. Now, it doesn't mean anything anymore, but we have Varnas, just like because of our blood. We're a blood religion. And we're a belief religion because the rabbis were mensches, and they said, look, if people want to convert, plus Herod was also converting people by force. His family, Idumeans, were converted by force. So we used to convert people to Judaism by force. But Paul, when he went out to organize among the Gentiles in the Aegean, Paul said, okay, I want you to follow Jesus. And everyone who follows Jesus is part of the Christian church in Jerusalem that are Jews. Everyone was Jewish. So they said, okay, how do we convert to follow Jesus? He said, first you need to convert, you need to be circumcised. And they say, what does that mean? And when he explained what circumcised meant, it's amazing he didn't get any sales. Because they had no way to sterilize anything. So you could die. The chances are you would die if you're an adult and you get circumcised. So Paul decides, that's enough of this. Believe in Jesus, eat pork, I don't care, but you got to believe in Jesus. They said, we can do that. And now, 1 out of every 3 people on earth is a Christian. And there's 125 Jews. So don't tell me that it didn't matter what Paul did. And Paul was the most positive of all of the followers of Jesus toward Jews. In John 8:44-45, we read one of the most painful statements of Christian anti-Jewishness. Now, I don't say anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is racial. And the difference between Hitler and anti-Jewish Christians, and Hitler was anti-Christian, was that Christians never, aside from the Inquisition and the and certain medieval excesses, Christians generally didn't want Jews exterminated. The Crusades killed 50,000 Jews in the Rhine Valley. But generally, Christians didn't want Jews killed. They wanted us to convert. And the reason they didn't want us killed is that our coming back to Christianity was the sign that Jesus was about to come and make the world so that the 405 has 4 cars on it. This is John 8:44-45. You Jews, are of your father who is the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he did not abide in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. That is John. And that on Friday, Good Friday, my grandmother in Russia would hide in her basement, because on Good Friday, the Latin Rite, which was all the Catholics had at that time, the Rite in Latin, would pray on Good Friday for the conversion of the perfidiae Judei, the perfidious Jews, the horrible Jews, that the Christians would pray for that. And then on Friday after church, Good Friday, of Easter Sunday, before Easter Sunday, the Christians would come out of church and go and burn down Jewish homes and rape and murder Jews. And that's what Good Friday meant to my grandmother. So these are the Christian anti-Jewish notions. And they are the result of Christian teaching. But remember when I explained to you that the Torah is a heteronymous work. It has things that are pro-woman, things that are anti-woman, things that are this and that. Well, listen to this. This is from Paul's letter to the Corinthians in response to about Jews. He said, there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different ministries, but the same Lord. There are different works, but the same God who accomplishes all of them in every one. It is one and the same Spirit who produces all these gifts, distributing them to each as he wills. That is 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And then in Romans chapters 9 to 11, which is where Paul tells all his good stuff about Jews, we read in 11:28-29, but as touching the election of the Jews are beloved for their fathers' sakes, for the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. That means God made a covenant with the Jews. If God revoked that covenant for Christians, we are denying God. Because we are saying God could revoke a covenant. Well, then God could revoke our covenant. But God never revokes a covenant. So the covenant with Jews is forever, according to Paul. Now, in 1965, as the result of the work of Cardinal Bea and John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI initiated in the Second Vatican Council a document called Nostra Aetate in 65, which was the statement that regardless of the John quotes, anti-Jewishness, anti-Semitism, violence against Jews is against Catholic teaching. End of story. And they also wrote notes for the schools, which were teaching anti-Jewish stuff. There are other positive Christian views about Jews. And by the way, Cardinal Bea, who influenced John the 23rd, Cardinal Bea was convinced to push this. The Second Vatican Council didn't want to pass Nostra Aetate. But John the 23rd, one of the great spiritual leaders of the modern world, John the 23rd pushed it through. And he pushed it through because Cardinal Bea pushed it through. And Cardinal Bea pushed it through because in the evenings, this German prelate would go over to the apartment of Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he would study and talk with his friend Heschel. And Heschel and Bea were close friends. They were the first God Squad. And Heschel said, you have to do something. Because in 1960, the sociologists Glock and Stark had done studies in Seattle, and they discovered that the more religious a Catholic person was, the more likely that Catholic person was to have anti-Semitic beliefs. That the more religious, the more anti-Jewish. And Heschel said, look at who you're teaching. Look at what you're teaching. I wish I could go to the Muslim world and say the same thing to them. Look what you're teaching these children about Jews. How do you expect them to grow up and not hate Jews and not want to be jihadists? How do you expect that to happen? You have to change your educational system. And that's what Nostra Aetate did for the Catholic Church. There's a Swiss theologian named Karl Rahner who tried to square the circle. He said, look, it's very nice to be nice to Jews. We all are in favor of Nostra Aetate. But we do have John 14:6. And what are we going to do to say that's God's word? Because we believe the only salvation is through Jesus. So he came up with the most remarkable theological somersault that has ever been created. He developed the idea of anonymous Christians, Karl Rahner. And Rahner's idea was that if you are a non-Christian, you're saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus. You are saved by Jesus. You don't know you're saved by Jesus, but you are. Because his sacrifice was so transcendental that it saves everyone. But you don't know it. So what are you? Not Jewish. You're Jewish. But you're an anonymous Christian. And that's how he squared the circle. Now, I told you I was going to irritate you, and I will close with this. I'm going to irritate you. I'm out of time, but I don't care. I want to talk to you about the word goyim. Okay? I want to talk to you about the word goyim. And I want to suggest to you, because everyone in this room has a very, very finely attuned radar for anti-Semitism. Oh, what did that man say about Jews? Whoa, oh, was he an anti-Semite? Whoa, wait a minute, that's anti-Semitic. Get the ADL, sick it on him. Whoa, that's we can pick it up at any distance behind a bush. We know an anti-Semite everywhere, even if they aren't anti-Semites. The question is, do we have any sense of when we have prejudice against Christians? Any sense? Do we ever even, is the term Jewish anti-Christianism, which I just created, of course, does that make any sense to you? No. Why? Because Eddie never teaches this. And if he wasn't in Oklahoma, in Yennerville, in the end of the earth, I would have never had a chance to teach this. But when we say goyim, when my grandmother said goyim, she didn't mean Tom Hartman, my best friend. She didn't mean my beloved Christian co-religionist, my partner up the same mountain to the same God. She meant drunken, anti-Semitic bastard. That's what she meant by goyim. And when she said that someone had a goyisha cup, and God forbid some of you have used that phrase in your talking to who cares who. Because if you've used that phrase, you are not a friend of mine. And I am not your teacher. And I never want you to refer to me as your teacher if you've used that phrase. Just like I would say, if you've ever used the word kike, if I would hope Tommy would say this to children in school, if you've ever used that word, I am not your priest. And I say that in his memory and his name, you are not my students. Because goyisha cup, what does that Yiddish term mean? Goyisha head. It means stupid. What are you, a goyisha cup? You don't know how to do that? Stupid. We think of Christians as stupid. When I wanted to play golf, my grandmother would say, what are you doing this goyim nachas? Goyim nachas. Nachas means joy. Goyim is, I wish there was a term in English for it. There isn't. Non-Jew is not the term. Drunken anti-Semitic bastard is the term. But goyim nachas means things that give Gentiles pleasure. And it's usually was referred to, football was a classic example of goyim nachas. What, you go out, they hit you? You could get hurt? Such goyim nachas. A priest in Yiddish is called a galach. A galach. What does galach mean? Well, of course you didn't think of it. People said, oh, I just meant Jew. I'm talking to a famous guy, and he said, oh yeah, I wouldn't buy, you'd understand this, I wouldn't buy it retail. I said, fuck you. Fuck you. I said, what do you mean I wouldn't buy it retail? You mean Jews don't buy retail because we're cheap? You know that's an anti-Semitic slur. Galach means a shaved guy, because Jews have beards, and so a shaved person had to be And it doesn't mean, oh, so he's shaved and I'm not shaved. Galach. Goyim just means nations in the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it just means nations. We're called the Jewish people. We're called a Goy Atzum V'Rav, a great and mighty nation. But I'm talking about Yiddish here. And I'm talking about what generations of pogroms and anatefkas and everything. Now, so we say, but let me tell you, African Americans who hate whites and who are very, very visible say, yeah, we're angry at whites. Yeah, we want reparations. But it's because of all that we suffered and all that we suffered and all that we suffered. And if I tell Jews, you know, you're talking about Christians the way Christians talk about us who hate us. Doesn't it bother you that you have prejudice against Christians who did nothing to you? And they say, no. I was just reflecting on the struggles of our people and the fact that Christian anti-Semitism and so forth. In this portion, I will say this, the rabbis developed a way to reach out. And it was called the Sheva B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of the children of Noah. In this portion, there are 7 laws. And the rabbis who were trying to build a connection to Christianity, the rabbis say if a Christian obeys these 7 laws, they will inherit the world to come the same as Jews. And that was a Jewish teaching. And it's from this week's portion. The 7 laws are not to worship idols, not to curse God, to establish courts of justice, not to commit murder, not to commit adultery, bestiality, or sexual immorality, not to steal, not to eat flesh torn from a living animal. And that is the 7 laws of Noah that the rabbis codified. And I want you to know, it's fine to laugh at differences between traditions. It's not prejudiced or bigoted. But there must be underneath it a level of love and compassion and understanding. I leave you with a joke that only a Jew can tell, but Tommy loved it. So the Harvard University crew team, that's the joke really, would beat the Yeshiva University crew team. That's the joke. The Yeshiva University crew team. They would beat them every year in a 3-mile race. They'd beat them by 2 miles and 7/8. So the rabbi of Yeshiva calls in the coach of the Yeshiva University crew team and says, Mendel, it was actually Mendel Farnsworth III, but he says, Mendel, I don't expect to ever beat Harvard, but you got to do better or you're fired. So a week later, Mendel comes back. Rabbi, I went to Cambridge. I hid in the bushes. I watched Harvard's crew team practice on the Charles River, and I watched them, and I learned their secret. We're going to do better. Don't worry. And the rabbi says, so what's their secret? And he says, well, they got 6 guys rowing and only 1 guy shouting. Now, a Jew can tell that joke. Tommy tried to tell that joke. He messed it all up. Because that's a loving joke. It's a loving joke about the fact that we yell and scream a lot. And I want to thank you for letting me scream at you. And I want to thank you for letting me teach you. Good job. Thank you. I'm sorry for those I didn't call on. I didn't want to call on you.
You've read Constantine's story.
Right.
And you know
Was it good?
you cannot divorce 2,000, even though the Nazis are pagans, you can't divorce them from 2,000 years of Christianity.